one builds up towards the Easter weekend. This normally is where this passage would be placed. Chronologically, it happens after Jesus' triumphant entry into the city of Jerusalem. When Jesus did what he did in this passage, he had already started noticing the shadow of a cross on the horizon. And he knew that in that very same week, his execution would take place. As the sermon unfolds this morning, however, I trust that it will make perfect sense to you why I had to choose this particular passage. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 11, where Jesus cleanses the temple. On reaching Jerusalem, so the triumphal entry had already taken place, the children singing his praises, people shouting Hosanna and putting palm branches in the road. As Jesus got to Jerusalem, this is his first stop that he gets up to. He enters the temple. Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of thieves." The chief priests, no surprise here, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the experts in other words, heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. It would have been quite worthwhile for us to check out the church's liturgical calendar and place this passage where it belongs. In other words, in the journey to Easter. I always try very hard to create a chronological sense of events, so you must not be shocked if we have this passage again in that week building up to Easter. But I really felt in my heart that this should be what we investigate today. I remember years and years ago when I was the youth pastor at Strand Methodist Church, how an old lady one day after service came to me ranting and raving. Her argument was clearly based on this passage. She had a huge issue with my youth selling bookmarks in church. She had a big problem with them raising their funds in God's house for their leadership weekend away. According to her, it shouldn't have been allowed inside the sanctuary. They should have done it in the hall, or if not, in the garden outside. I wanted to help her come to fresh understandings of what this passage means when interpreted responsibly. I sat her down and helped her to put this passage in new light. You see, everybody automatically thinks that when they read this passage that Jesus was angry because there was the exchange of cash in the house of God. This was not the case. The whole business of the poor being exploited was what Jesus had triggered him so deeply. You see, this was the practice of the day. When I talk about the diaspora, I mean the Jews living outside Jerusalem. So throughout the centuries, the Jews moved further and further away from their homeland, since already Egyptian slavery. So there were Jews in Egypt, in other parts of North Africa, as far away as Persia, which is modern-day Iran. And of course, for one of the pilgrim festivals, these Jews would very committedly and passionately travel to the holy city to celebrate at the temple of all places. There was something extremely meaningful and something incredibly special about having either a Passover, the harvest of the first fruits, or tabernacles at the temple. And so many Jewish people would save up their entire lives in order to just have one Passover in the temple on Mount Zion. The Jews would then arrive at the temple with their homegrown stock to bring as a sacrifice to be offered. Some people would have traveled with things like bulls or even lambs, particularly when it was the Passover. The poor would have cultivated a pair of doves where they lived and tracked that all the way to the temple in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, the system had become so very corrupt and so dishonest by the time of Jesus, the priests did not accept anybody who brought an offering from home. They would study the bull or the lamb, or dare I say the pair of doves, and say to even the poorest of the poor, it was a noble attempt, but we're not going to settle for what you've brought. You have to buy your sacrifice from us. And it's going to cost you sometimes almost literally an arm and a leg. If the average price for a bull was $50, the priest should have pushed it up to $1,000, if not $2,000, and no prizes for the one who guesses where that extra funds went. And so Jesus very quickly called out the system in all its disgust and said, I actually have a problem with this, and I'm not going to stand for it. And he did lose his temper ever so slightly. The poorest of the poor, would have been able to scrape together enough cash only to buy a pair of doves, which would have been at the lowest of the list, which would have been the cheapest sacrifice to acquire. But even the doves were overpriced. No one would have taken the risk of any longer growing their own doves at home, because they knew full well that the priests at the temple would say, thank you, but no thank you. And so even the most sincere attempt would have been rejected. There was also another custom that had evolved in the temple system. No foreign currencies were allowed. And so the Jews living in North Africa would have had North African money. The Jews living in Persia would have had Persian money. And of course, if they now were okay with the priests not having accepted their sacrifice, they still wouldn't have been able to buy a sacrifice from the priests with the money in their pocket. They first had to go to the Bureau de Change. And of course, again, no prizes for anybody who guesses where that extra cash went. The exchange rate was exorbitant and ridiculous, and very few people ended up being able to afford even the simplest sacrifice, which would have been 2 doves. And so the system was back to front and upside down, and Jesus saw this from the word go, cleared his throat and said, there's no way that I'm going to be a part of this kind of messed up system. That's why he chased away the dove sellers, because their prices were unreasonable to say the least. And that's why he overturned the tables of the money changers, because the poor would end up with even less food to eat and less clothes to wear. So there's nothing wrong with a group of teenagers selling bookmarks in the church in order to go away for a leadership. Why did I choose this peculiar passage for this morning? How am I now going to redeem myself with what I want to say in the next while? Jesus had a problem with the house of God having become something else other than the house of God. And that's the point I want us to focus on. Jesus says there in the passage, quoting one of the Old Testament prophets, saying, "My Father had said that His house would be a house of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into something very ugly and very unpleasant." Jesus saw the system and knew that there was no way that it was of God. The house of God had ceased to be a house of God. It had been turned by broken, messed up, dodgy humans into something entirely different. And Jesus is making it very clear in this passage that this is not how it was supposed to be. This is not what God ever intended. Let's rewind a little bit and let's go to when Jesus was 12. So it's give or take 20 years from when Jesus cleansed the temple. There is that very endearing account that Luke gives us of Jesus at the temple, age 12. A boy with an inquiring mind chatting up the religious authorities. Just to give you a little bit of a wild image of what that scene would have looked like, we've got a pic that's going to go up on the screen. There we have Jesus, probably a bit more pale than he would have been. There's a westernized picture. And there are some of the big shots in the temple, conversing with Jesus and the other way around. And Luke tells us that Jesus was 12 at this stage, and I cannot help but wonder if Jesus there already started seeing, started noticing, starting to witness in front of his very eyes the corruption in the temple system. And maybe there already Jesus got these bad vibes, feeling in his heart of hearts that something is terribly and horribly wrong. Jesus does say to his parents when they eventually found him, remember they started the track all the way back to Nazareth without him. They thought that he was somewhere with friends or neighbors in the company, and then he wasn't. So they rushed back to Jerusalem. Where did they find him? Nowhere else but the temple. That's where he wanted to be. And I wonder if Jesus left there with that commitment, having checked out what the system was like, with that commitment of one day changing things radically. We have accounts of Jesus wanting to make the temple, in other words, the house of God, of Jesus trying to turn it back into exactly that. The most meaningful record that we have of Jesus making a very noble attempt would be in Mark chapter 12, where we read about the widow who went to church with a very small offering. In fact, she couldn't have given less even if she tried. What she had to put in the temple coffers was worth a 16th of a penny. So it could have arguably been the smallest amount ever presented at the temple. The religious leaders that were standing by frowned on this woman. They didn't offer her any assistance, knowing full well that the breadwinner of the household had died because she was a widow. No. But they weren't going to help her. They weren't going to minister to her. They weren't going to reach out to her. They were going to condemn her. For why dare she bring a gift to God's house that is so small and so insignificant? Jesus sees this whole business and Jesus decides to comment. And Jesus says, let me tell you today, probably looking in the direction of the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, and the scribes. Jesus says loudly and clearly for every part of the temple to hear, I'm telling you the truth today. This woman who came to the house of God in hope and in faith has given more than all of you lot put together. And I see that as Jesus trying to make the house of God again, for it had ceased to be that. The house of God had become a lair of iniquity and corruption and greed and ego and selfishness. God's house was meant to be a special place for God's people. A place where they would come and meet with Him in worship and in prayer. A place where they could feel safe and at home. A place where they could experience what belonging looks like. A place of wealth. But humans, as we always do, humans have made it something very different. The worship was shallow. The sacrifices were empty. And God was insulted. The house of God was supposed to be a glorious place, a place where His presence dwelt and could be experienced. Remember how proudly Solomon dedicated the temple in the Old Testament? Let's go to 2 Chronicles 7 verse 1. And let's read what it says there. When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven. Can you imagine this? Fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices. Because there were a whole lot of religious leaders doing their thing, sacrificing this and sacrificing that, trying to in that way bring praise to God. And then it says there, as Solomon was praying for God's blessing on this brand new building that had been erected, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. There's the summary of today's sermon. The glory of God having filled the temple. There's nothing that I long for more from here. There's nothing that I long for more than for when you come to church on a Sunday morning, that you will experience in this place the glory of the God who saved you. Amen. The God who has set you free. The God who sent His Son for your sake. And the God who loves you more than you will ever know or understand. There's an even better verse later in that same chapter. Let me give it to you. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 16. The context is still the dedication of the temple that Solomon built. This time God is speaking and saying, I have chosen and consecrated this temple so that my name may be there forever. There's nothing that I can think of that would give me a greater thrill than God saying that about United Church Hermanus. I have chosen this place. It is mine and forever will be, for my name resides there. And as if that is not enough, listen to this. God said, my eyes and my heart will always be there. Can you begin to imagine the implications for UCH? I want to hear God echo that sentiment today, saying that about us, about this place. Saying that His eyes would always be on us, and that His heart will always be felt and found where? Here amongst us. That is God's dream for His house. That is God's intention for when His people gather. I want this to be our reality, not once a month, and definitely not once a term. I want this to be our experience, not every second week or every evening service that we do once every 4 weeks. I want this to be real for us every Sunday, Sunday after Sunday, and week after week. I want you to come here knowing that in this place the truth of God will be spoken. And that in this place, the hope of God will be up for grabs for all who are looking for it. This is what I'm trying to say. That when you come to church, that you will here in this place find an unmistakable sense of God's heart. And of God's grace and mercy flowing towards you. Remember about 16 months ago, somebody took me on a cruise on the Danube. Remember that? One of my friends in Somerset West, she is an old lady with a desire to spoil a nice younger man, namely me. Her children are clearly not in the mood to travel with her, so I do it. Against my will, of course. I mean, I had absolutely no desire to go on to a beautiful cruise on the stunning Danube, seeing unforgettable places. So we started the cruise in Passau, in eastern Germany, close to the Austrian border. And in Passau, on the very first day of the trip, the tour guide took us to St. Stephen's Cathedral in Passau. Just so that you can see more or less where I'm at, we're going to put up a pic for you. There it is. That's what it looks like. It's quite a dominant, impressive building. If you think the outside speaks volumes, you should check it out from the inside. It was gobsmacking. I was dumbstruck by the ornateness and by the over-the-topness, if you know what I'm saying. There's the pulpit, there's the ceiling. Every nook and cranny has been lavishly decorated. Have I got a pic of the organ, Debbie? There's the organ. It's the second largest organ in the world. The largest organ, wait for it, the largest organ in the world is actually in Mexico in a shopping mall. So that's not a bit of info that I enjoy giving to you. At least I got to see the second largest organ on the planet. There it is, in Passau at St. Stephen's Cathedral. And of course I oohed and awed at everything. But let me tell you this, Jesus was not there. The place was cold. It was clinical. It was impersonal. And of course I respect every form and style of worship. If that's how others do it and it works for them, all love to them. But my heart was just not convinced that God's heart was there. I'm not even sure if they actually have Sunday services. It looks like it's now only a tourist attraction. So prayers in that place have ceased. And as exquisite as it is as a building, I kept on wondering to myself, what has happened to the hospitality of God? Aren't His houses supposed to be places of warmth and welcome for all? Isn't everybody and anybody everybody's supposed to be able to go in there, no matter how broken, or how shameful, or how lonely, or how lost they are. Somewhere along the line, we have missed the point, and we have made the house of God something else, something far less than it could be, than it should be. Last year, we had a very exciting time here at United Church. I decided to have a signboard up in the middle of the pathway as one comes up, so that everybody sees it and reads it and feels it as they enter church. I gave you all a ballot paper, and there were 4 options to vote for as to what we would end up printing on the signboard. Option 1 was, you belong here. Option 2 was, your spiritual home in the heart of Hermanus. Option 3 was, no perfect people allowed, which was my personal favorite. And then there is the one we've just put up a couple of days ago, the one which says, welcome home. I knew what I would be preaching today, and that's why I had our maintenance guy put up the one that I want us to reflect on for the next week. It simply but profoundly says, welcome home. And so, this is my fantasy. A fantasy of everybody who comes here feeling at home. This must be a place of family and fellowship and food. Not necessarily the physical kind, but the spiritual kind I'm talking about. Although I prefer both, if I have any say in it. I want this to be a place of belonging. You see, the world batters us. The world beats us up, and we end up quite bruised. And so, no matter what you face in the week, no matter what harrowing experience you are going through as we speak, when you come in here, I want you to feel safe and cared for. I want you to feel looked after. I want you to feel loved. I want you to feel like you matter. And I want you to know that as you come, with whatever you are wrestling with, that in this place, God's heart stands ready to embrace you. As I was preparing for today, my mind over and over and over again went to Luke chapter 15, where we have the parable of the prodigal son. You see, it was the thought of home that called him to action. It was when he remembered a place of warmth with a cozy fireplace even. It was when he remembered the good food back at home while sitting in a filthy pigsty. It was the thought of home which included for him a loving father that made him get up and return. And so there's nothing that I want more for people to come here and amongst us and in this spiritual space find a home. Of course, anybody can put up a signboard outside in thick font, bold, bit of cursive or whatever we've got going there. Anybody can put up a signboard and say, welcome home, everybody. But it's a different thing to live it. It's a different thing altogether to practice it. And so we all have to consider this question. with that signboard that we have put up so very visibly? Do we mean it? I might as well be honest with you, I haven't always meant it. Because some people looking for me are just so darn irritating, and I have to duck and dive sometimes, you know. I would prefer them going to another church like St. Peter's or Christ Church for help. I don't know why everybody's always looking for me, you know. Probably because I say, welcome home to whoever walks out the bar. And so I need to constantly shift my attitude. I constantly have to grow in my approach. Because I would hate to be a hypocrite, saying, welcome home with a signboard, which is the first thing one sees as one arrives here, and then not live it out like Jesus did. Do we mean what we say when we express this ethos of welcome home? There are some people who we would prefer, for convenience, to exclude from that little statement. Okay? People who are different from us. Perhaps different in language, or in culture, or definitely in socio-economic background. Can we really say that we love here at United the poor and the homeless? Of course, we tick the box with that weekly soup kitchen on a Monday, but is that enough? Do we live out this kingdom principle of welcoming home everyone, even those who smell a bit iffy? And even those who look like at the first opportunity they would grab our cell phone or handbag and run for the hills. It's the easiest thing imaginable to put up a signboard which says, welcome home. It's a different thing, living up to it, like Jesus would want us to. In John chapter 6, Jesus says something which I have found disturbing. My life would have been easier had Jesus not said it at all. But now that it's there, I can't erase it. It stares me in the face. John 6, verse 37. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. Are we going to honestly ignore the words of Jesus? In the modern versions of Scripture, it's actually put differently. It's where Jesus says, no one who comes to me will ever be rejected. And so I wonder if that is a gospel value that you and I are daily striving to live up to making our church a place of unconditional welcome. I have not always got it right, and I've confessed that to you. Now it's your turn. I still too often experience here in our congregation people who are not making this a home for us. Too many of us are still too judgmental. Too many of us are still too opinionated. Too many of us are still too self-centered. And so we will make it hard for others to find a home here because we are not willing to change. And so the question that all of us will have to think upon, at least for the next 7 days, has to be this. Are we making, or it's even more personal than that, it's an individual thing. Am I helping to make this church a home for others? You don't have to answer in haste. I want you to go and pray about it. I want you to go and meditate on it. Have you been, and you don't have to answer out loud right this minute, have you been a stumbling block for people here because of your pride or your arrogance or your stubbornness or your unwillingness to change? Or have you made it a natural thing? Have you been part of the process of us wanting to make this church irresistible? The church that people have been waiting for. Or has your attitude stunk? Is that the right? Stunk. Has your attitude stunk? Has your pride got in the way? And has your refusal to budge from what you have always believed been a challenge? Quite something to think about, eh? I'm right there with you. You see, there have been times where even I, the pastor, where even I have made it difficult for people to find a home here. And I need to transform. And I need to heal. And I need to let the Spirit shape me some more. And mold me some more. And prune me some more. So that I can become the pastor that I was born to be in the first place. And you might not be in the full-time ministry. But if you say that you follow Jesus, you don't have a choice. What are you going to do to make this church more attractive? To make this church more welcoming? To make this church more of a place of belonging and love and care for all? That was God's intention for His house. And that needs to be our intention for this church. Let me just see if I'm still on track. Almost done. You don't have to look so stressed. I'm almost finished. So one more thought, quickly, before I end. If heaven is our home, then surely church, which is our spiritual home, must be a foretaste of what is to come. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that the local congregation needs to be an expression of what we will feel and see and know in heaven. So the local church has to be a pocket of the kingdom of God. It has to be a revelation of what the gospel looks like in action. And so in other words, when you come here on a Sunday, I want you to get a little bit of a feel, a little bit of a sense, a foretaste, shall we call it that, of what heaven's going to be like. Help me make it happen, man. Let's journey together. And let's walk every day in faith, in obedience, and obviously in love. Jesus had this intense struggle because he saw the house of God having been taken over by broken humans who advocated selfishness and greed and were even okay with the exploitation of the poor. Let's shake off everything we need to shake off, and let's shed all the values that are not Jesus filled, and let's every day strive to become the people He wanted us to be from the start. I'm going to close by something I saw on the welcome board at the church in Exeter. I think it was called St. Cyprian's. It's now 15 years ago, so my memory isn't 100% clear. But as far as I remember, it was St. Cyprian's interdenominational church in the center of Exeter, which had this welcome notice on their signboard outside. It read something to the following effect: we welcome everybody and anybody. We welcome those who believe and those who don't. We welcome those whose faith is strong and sure and those who have no faith at all. We welcome agnostics and atheists. We welcome those who have faith in God and those who want to have faith in God. We welcome everybody and anybody. We welcome those who have tattoos and those who don't, those who have piercings and those who don't. We welcome those who battle with the big questions of life and all those who think that they have figured it all out. We welcome people of all languages and cultures. We welcome blacks, whites, and everything in between. We welcome sun worshippers, stargazers, and tree huggers. And we welcome even you.